Hello, my friends. Welcome to our 10-day journey of self love and emotional well being. I just had an experience that totally shifted my frame, just totally shifted my energy, and reminded me that humor is such an important part of this journey and to not take things so seriously. So I was preparing myself, getting in the zone to be present and to bring this lovely message to you. And I was sitting here and I was like, what is that sound of water? Now, sometimes asking that question is a horrible experience, but in this case, I was like, why does the waterfall sound like it has so much water falling? I had turned on the water when I came home last night to fill the fountain, and I was so distracted by coming home that I forgot to turn it off. It was running all night long. Now, in the grand scheme of things, that's like inconvenient and not wise and not good use of resources. But in the big scheme of things, it's like, oh my God, how funny is that? And actually, saying that out loud is such a great segue to today's opening lesson because I can tell you that 10 years ago, if I had faced this exact same experience, a different voice would be barking at me in my head. Because today's message is about the inner critic and quieting the inner critic. And I can tell you that years ago, I would have done something like that and I would have beat up on myself for who knows how long. Because it was the energy, it was the established energy, it was the established pattern. Not because there was any truth to what I was telling myself. There was enough truth for it to trigger the thoughts. But that doesn't mean that the voice of the critic is accurate. What it means that the voice of the critic is trying to watch out for you. And it's doing its best at doing its job. So let's talk about the inner critic today and the idea of quieting the inner critic. You see, the brain's primary directive, our brain's primary directive is survival. The whole point of the training, the conditioning of the brain, everything that we've learned has been towards survival. I just said some very broad statements, broad sweeping statements that aren't actually accurate. And so please forgive me for that, for the abuse of that very broad stroke. But it is the case that the primary directive of the brain is to keep us alive. And we learn patterns that work. Clearly, they work because we're still alive. And so the brain interprets that as this pattern works. It kept us alive. From infancy and even before infancy, our system is being programmed. Our brain, our body, and our energy, our nervous system are programmed. So the brain is always watching for evidence, for input, for patterns that say, ooh, danger, ooh, we need to implement this survival strategy. And the thing is that because the chemical environment that programs our body internally, the hormones, the chemicals, the oxygen, CO2, all of the different aspects, they interwork. Our breath patterns influence our experience of our physical being. We can create anxiety in our body by the way that we breathe, and we influence the way that we breathe by the way that we hold our body. And that anxiety then influences the way that the brain works, so that it triggers thoughts that create and reflect anxiety. So you see, this interwoven system that we tend to believe is linear, and if I will just fix my brain, I can fix all the other things. If I just change my thinking, everything will change, is simplistic. That understanding is not wrong, but it is simplistic. So understanding and finding multiple ways to engage with our systems of who we are and the programming that has been created, this is what this program is about. It is my first time ever teaching it, and I thank you for coming along with me on this ride. I hope that you'll give me great and encouraging and supportive and helpful to improve it feedback along the way. Help me know what you're experiencing so that I can make it better and improve it and confirm whether or not I'm teaching the things that I intend to teach, and helping you embrace and engage the tools that I'm hoping to share with you. Because we don't have to do anything, but we have the opportunity to reprogram and retrain our systems. Now, certain things are physical, and once they get triggered, their consequence is inevitable, but we can change how we interact with that system by our thoughts, by our attention and awareness, and by applying tools that we can learn. We can adjust the way that we interact with the panic that our body feels, or the behaviors that we engage in, once we can be present enough and aware enough to observe them. So this is what we're starting with. We'll get to the idea of being the coach. That'll be in a later date. But today we're talking about the inner critic, shutting off, redirecting the voice of the inner critic so that we can engage with our world and our experiences differently. So the brain was programmed since gestation, even pre-gestation, for certain inputs, experiences, external physical experiences, to result in particular hormonal expressions or physical experiences. So that in my case, I know that my mother grew up in a very unsafe environment. My mother grew up as a war refugee. I know that her early childhood was dangerous. And I know that that experience influenced her and her family, and that influenced every experience that my mother ever had. To the point where the life that was led when she was pregnant with me and had already lost one baby who was born prematurely, between her life experiences and the environment in which she was pregnant, I know that my mother did not feel safe while she was carrying me and I was developing in her womb. And I know that that influenced me, my physical being, as it was developing, was exposed to extreme stress. Extreme is an extreme word in this case, but for the developing baby, it was extreme. It was an environment which was not hospitable to being calm and peaceful and happy and relaxed, because there wasn't very much of that in my mother's environment. Now, it wasn't all bad by any means, but that means that I was predisposed to anxiety, to melancholy. I've dealt with depression much of my life, and I followed the pattern where these experiences, this environment, this programming trained me to expect the world and my life experience to reflect that energy. And lo and behold, imagine that. That is what I saw around me. It's what I was attuned to. It's what I paid attention to. All of the ways that I wasn't potentially safe, and how, in my case, how to fix those things, prevent those things from coming to pass, coming to be, so that I could be safe. So I have been a fixer almost all of my life. I say that because I always was trying to control my environment so that I could be safe. And now, finally, I have come to a place where that will never be fully gone, because it literally formed me. It was a part of my forming. But I no longer have to be unconscious of my interactions with the world around me and the stimulus, the experiences that I have in my life. So I wanted to share my story. That just really came up strong, and I wanted to share that. It took me a little off my course, but I want you to have this understanding, this picture, and to be able to imagine in your life how that may fit. Okay? So we are trained and programmed biochemically, as well as then once we get to verbal stage, we have interactions, but it has to do with, am I safe? It starts and is primarily this biological need, desire to be safe, survival. So once I was born, I was looking at the world around me, perceiving patterns that might cause distress or potential harm to me. I was hypersensitive, and that resulted in anxiety. And all of that is trained. Now, one of the things that is also trained is the voice, because we are here to talk about the inner critic today. So there's a fundamental biological need to be safe, to see the patterns, in my case, to change the patterns so that I could feel safe. And that's the biological training. And then there is the verbal training, or the modeling that we see in the caretakers and the adults and experiences around us. And this is through birth and through life. So this can always be the case, that we will have a new experience, particularly one that is traumatizing, that has an emotional charge, an emotional experience, a physical emotional experience that doesn't get fully processed emotionally, that the energy of it doesn't get us through the cycle of being triggered into a triggered state where the body is ready to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, through that state back into rest and relax. So our nervous system, you remember that we are an entire amalgam, right? Brain, body, nervous system. Yes, and energy. The nervous system has different aspects to it. We have the autonomic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And so we get ready to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And can the parasympathetic nervous system become the primary nervous system engaged so that we can come back to, we disengage the autonomic nervous system, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, the 4 Fs, back into rest and digest. I'm safe. So if we are in a constantly triggered state, that's the looking for. And beyond the looking for, but I see the threats. Oh yes, I'm sorry, I got off on a little tangent again, wanting to explore and explain that a little bit more. We have the physical experiences, but we also have the modeling of how the caretakers around us interact with the world around them. Do they get triggered? Do they go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn? What triggers them? And how does that impact them, and how does that impact us? How do they deal with coming back to a relaxed state? The parasympathetic nervous system is how we get back to a relaxed state so that we can be in relationship. We connect in the rest and digest state of being. We connect with ourselves, we connect with one another. We are able to be in a state of openness and vulnerability, of receiving, something that so many of us don't do well, is we don't receive well, because we don't rest and digest and become centered and safe in this nervous system state, in this biological state. So, another way that we have learned how to interact with the world, another way that our nervous system in part has been trained, is not only by the modeling, but also by the words. The words that we hear, the language that we hear around us, the challenges that we hear, the cautions that we hear, the warnings that we hear, that our mothers, parents, caretakers, teachers, social media, marketing, all of those messages that we get for how we're not okay and what we need to do differently so that we can be okay, or be assured that we will be okay. All of those cautionary voices. So you put all of those experiences together, and what do you have? You have an inner critic who is trying to keep you safe. Frankly, it doesn't care about your thriving, much less your glowing, which is another topic. But my way of saying we can move from survival to thriving, and beyond thriving into just glowing. And we have to understand and have some new tools, and we have to work with this inner critic and retrain it. And just like my water debacle can show, it's possible. It is possible to retrain the inner critic to be more conscious instead of reactive. So that's my message for today. Checking in with my time. Don't remember exactly when I got started, but let's wrap it up with this. The breath. How we breathe is a tremendous tool to engage our nervous system and our body consciously, and to begin to retrain the chemicals. The chemical reactions are automatic, and we can train ourselves to give intentional, conscious direction, which will then automatically create different results. And we can do that with our posture, the way we hold our body, because it gives messages to the brain and the body, and the nervous system, and by the way that we breathe. So I'm going to teach you one of the many tools that are out there. Maybe you've already heard of it: 4-square box breathing. Taking a count of 4 breaths, and it has 4 stages. Sorry, I just misspoke. The 4 stages of a single breath: inhalation, hold, exhalation, hold, inhalation, hold, exhalation, hold. I encourage you to say the counts out loud, softly, if you need to, in order to keep your brain focused. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get the brain out of an anxious, cycling, critical mode where it's telling you all of the things that you need to be paying attention to so that you can be safe, and getting the brain to focus on the body and the breath and how it feels. So and I also encourage you to keep this at a rather slow pace. It's the pattern of 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the important part, but you can control it even more by the tempo, the speed at which you count the numbers. So let's do this together. I'm going to model the pattern, and I'm going to say the numbers quietly, using as little breath as possible so that I can stay in the pattern. You ready? We're going to start. Here we go. 2, 3, 4. In. 2, 3. Hold. 2. Out. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3. In. 2, 3. Hold. 2, 3. Out. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2. In. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3. Out. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3. That's the pattern. Slow it down even more. I'm going to encourage you now to take a few moments to do this on your own for a little bit longer. I encourage you to set a timer for 2 minutes to practice this box breathing. Be aware of the experiences that you have, the thoughts that you have, the way that the inner critic tries to speak up about the practice, about you, about the other things that you need to be doing instead. All of that, just be aware and let it just come back to the counting, come back to the presence in the body with the breath. And then after you've done that practice, I encourage you to journal. I'll have some journal prompts for you, some directed journaling. Capture your experience, though. Capture this moment, and then answer those other questions. And then, if you would, share them on Facebook in the group. I'll send out that invitation as well. I am still getting organized. This is the first time I've done something like this. I appreciate your patience so much. I have one more suggestion for the 4-square box breathing exercise. If you're so inclined to test yourself, test as in get stronger, try something a little more advanced, go through that process visualizing the 7 points along your spine that are called the chakras, the 7 primary chakras, and breathe a square on each one, all the way up and all the way back down. And then repeat that if that feels like the right thing to do. And see how that experience feels, what that experience creates for you. Thank you so much, my friend. Thank you for this opportunity to practice and to face my own inner critic and give it a little bit of love and say, I love you, and this is my first time, and it doesn't have to be perfect, and the people that I love and who love me are with me. We are in this together. Let us take care of ourselves so that we can manage our lives with a little less stress. I love you, friend. Bye-bye.